We'll do Sims later, as I said. Here is our good pal. Always comes down when we need him, and this is a day we have to have him, and here he is. He's the great Billy Packer. Billy, I hate to have you on this kind of day, but it's wonderful for you to give us a few minutes here. A sad day. The great Enberg passes away. You got there in 1974 with him. A sad day for you, too, huh?
Well, it is a sad day, but incredible memories of what I think is certainly one of the greatest broadcasters, but even better of all the people I've ever met in my life, the consummate gentleman who basically never looked for any credit for himself, but everybody he ever worked with, he made them better. Just a wonderful, wonderful person who, when I think today of the sadness of losing him, but all the great memories we had of things that we were able to do together.
Billy, it's a great story about the first game you two ever did together without McGuire. This is in the 1974. Why don't you tell that story for a sec? Go ahead.
Well, Dick Enberg, as everybody knows, broadcast the game that really started to put basketball on the front burner when he did the UCLA-Houston game, and I was doing games as in the Atlantic Coast Conference with a broadcaster, and we had kind of done well together. And the two guys, Eddie Einhorn and Castleman Chesley, were the two guys that really started college basketball on television. They were bitter enemies, but they decided to do a game on Super Bowl Sunday between UCLA and Maryland. And so I got up to Maryland for the game, and met for the first time Eddie Einhorn, and he and Castleman Chesley asked me to go to breakfast and to inform me that they had a big problem. Dick Enberg was flying in from the West Coast, but Eddie Einhorn hadn't made an agreement that he would not be the play-by-play announcer. And the two guys that control college basketball were arguing who it would be, and they wanted to let me know that they decided that Dick Enberg would work half the game with me, and Jim Thacker would work the other half. And I'm thinking, oh boy, this isn't going to play out too well. And I knew that Jim, who was also a friend of mine, would go along with it. But I figured this hotshot from the West Coast is going to go crazy and storm out of the room and so forth. So when we got to have the meeting, and I'm watching this guy very closely, and when they told him that he'd only be working half a game, he looked over at Jim Thacker and said, "Jim, this is on your home territory. Would you like to work the first half or the second half? And I'll be happy to go down on the court and help you guys in any way I can." And I said, "Man, this guy's kind of a interesting person." So I worked a half a game. That's all I had done, a half a game with Dick. And what happened is the next year I had worked the NCAA tournament for NBC, and they called to tell me that, and I had done a game then I did the finals with Kurt Gowdy, which was incredible. And so NBC called and said they were making a change, and they were going to do a thing called regular season college basketball, and they had hired their play-by-play man. They wanted me to be the analyst, but and I thought it was Gowdy they were talking about, and then they said, "No, we can't tell you who it's going to be, but we want him to make the decision as to who he wants to work with." And so they called me back and said, kind of surprising, the fellow that we've hired and we want to be our new main guy said that he wants to work with a guy he only did a half a game with, and that's you. And so that's how Dick and I first started to work together. Dick basically picked me as his partner, and we worked together for 2 years before Al finally finished coaching, and then we worked together as a threesome, which was almost comical how that developed.
And we'll get to that in a sec. Billy, had you heard of Enberg before the Houston game with UCLA in 1968?
No. You got to remember now, there was no national television at college basketball back in those days. As a matter of fact, even the NCAA championship was not something that you basically remember seeing much of. So I didn't ever see like UCLA regular season games, and that's where Dick had made his mark on the West Coast, and he and John Wooden became obviously great friends and had great respect for each other, and UCLA was going through that incredible period of time. So, but I had not seen his work. Matter of fact, other than that Houston game, I had never seen him on television before until we worked that half a game together.
Wow, how about that? Now, you have that great success. I mean, I was in high school and college, and you know better than anybody, those high school kids and college kids in the mid-'70s, they couldn't get enough of college basketball. Those UCLA Notre Dame games on Saturday afternoons
right.
with you and Dick doing the games. I mean, I can recite those games like the back part of my hand, and I loved those games, and so did every guy my age loved those games. Then all of a sudden, McGuire wins the championship. He beats Carolina there in the Omni, and the next thing you know, here comes McGuire, and the three of you become a legendary team. Let's talk about that origin for a sec. Go ahead.
Well, Al McGuire was a very unusual guy. Matter of fact, I didn't respect him at all. He was kind of a guy that never gave you any of his time, and he was very difficult to understand. And I really felt that when I went to his practices, I wasn't impressed with what he was doing. And Rick Majerus and Hank Raymond were doing most of the coaching. So when NBC hired him, it was kind of strange to think, well, what's he going to do? And so NBC decided that he would work in a locker room, and Dick and I would broadcast the games. And so when we met for our first game, which was up in Milwaukee, we figured, well, we go to dinner with Al, and he never showed up. And so now we go to the game, and he's not there.
Wow.
And so the two of us are ready to broadcast, and we heard that he's been set up in the locker room. And we thought, well, that's really strange. And the idea was that whenever he thought of something that was important about the game, he'd press a button, the light would come on, and Dick Enberg would then say, let's go to the locker room with Al. Well, the problem was in the first half, the button never came on. So they went back and said, Al, you got to, when you see something, we didn't realize that Al had no interest in the game whatsoever. So and Dick credits me with this, but I always credit him. I don't know what the real history would show, but I said, it makes no sense for him to be in the locker room. He never spends any time with us, and why don't we bring him out and bring him on the court with us? Which is what Dick went and said, Al, we need this to be more of a team. You come out and sit with us. So it was Enberg to the left, I was in the center, and McGuire was on the right. Well, we do the first game, and Dick said to me, Billy, he said, he doesn't seem to be paying attention. How about if we put him in the middle? So they put him in the middle, and that's when it all started. And because Dick could keep him engrossed in the game, and Al was brilliant with his basketball mind, but not about the normal things that you would think about in a game. And that's how it all worked. And it was really kind of funny when the season ended. Al sent NBC a bill for being a part of the play-by-play group instead of just the halftime guy, and he ripped NBC off for $30,000. He bragged about that for years with me, thinking how cute that was. But Dick was just incredible at how he would and it wasn't just our group that he was able to do it. Everybody who he ever worked with, he made better. And he would go out of his way to help those people, in some cases without them even realizing it. Al was one of the first that I've ever been around. He said, Dixie's the guy that makes it all work. That's what we used to call Dick. He used to call him Dixie all the time. And Al was so insightful, and he was right. And I watched that about everybody that Dick ever worked with, the Merlin Olsons, or whether it was in any sport. He would always make, depending on what the guy's personality was, he could bring out the very, very best. McEnroe, as an example, in tennis. I'm not a friend of John's, and I don't know him that well, but I've been around him. But you can imagine how he became such a great tennis broadcaster, and I bet a lot of that he will attribute to the way that Dick Enberg was able to get him involved in the game and bring out the best of how he broadcast. I don't think anybody in the history of broadcasting ever was able to do that with all the people that he worked with over the years. And in my estimation, in regard to our three major sports, football, basketball, and baseball at the highest level, probably he and Kurt Gowdy on those three are the only two guys that could master it at the highest level year after year, game after game, and bring to America those three sports.
I completely agree, and that's a tricky spot, Billy. And you had worked with Kurt. That's delicate for the big guy for Enberg to come in and replace the legend, because that's very dicey of how the legend's going to handle it, and if Dick is not going to trample on the legacy of Gowdy. You were there to see it. How did that occur? Let me hear.
That was very interesting as well. And again, you got to remember, Dick and I worked the 1976. Bobby Knight's last undefeated team. We had worked that season in regular college basketball. And then when it came time for the tournament, the Final Four, Kurt was also, I didn't have any idea about this. Obviously, I was low on the totem pole, and Kurt had an agreement in his contract that he worked all the key championships for NBC. Of course, Dick also had that in contract. And I was called in the morning before the semifinal games and told by NBC that there could be a big problem. And I said, what's the problem? They said, well, you're going to work one game with Enberg and one game with Gowdy. But we have to have both of them at the opening of the first game. And so this is going to be a problem. We're afraid that those two, you're going to have the microphone. Now imagine this: I'm standing in the middle between Gowdy and Enberg. There are not many people ever had an opportunity to do that.
Good
and
point.
They said, Billy, you hold the mic and control the microphone, because we don't want one of them taking the mic and keeping the other one from speaking. And I'm saying, hey, you guys don't have any idea how great these two people are. They're never going to do that. And they were both so gracious, and that was, again, the turning of the page when Kurt was on the way out of ending his great career, and Dick starting his. It was very interesting.
Well, very interesting with the great Billy Packer. Would you agree that the two most important college basketball games in the last 50 years was UCLA Houston and then Indiana State Michigan State?
No, I wouldn't agree to that. I think that's a little bit of a revision of history. I think that the UCLA Houston game, because of John Wooden and Kareem Jabbar, the greatest college coach of all time in terms of championships, and the greatest college player, matter of fact, the greatest, in my estimation, greatest total basketball player of all time, were part of that incredible run. And going down and playing in the Dome Stadium, I think that is the most important game of intercollegiate basketball history in terms of changing things from where it was and what it became. But the Indiana State-Michigan State game, to be quite honest with you, was not a good basketball game.
Right.
But we think back now more about that game because of what Magic and Larry became, as opposed to what they were at that time. Now, I realize Indiana State was undefeated, and this Larry Bird was a guy that, I'll be quite honest with you, I didn't think he could be a great NBA player. I didn't think Magic would be a great NBA player. He dribbled the ball too high as a guard. He wasn't a good shooter, and he wasn't a power forward, and he certainly couldn't play center. And less than 9 months from what my opinion was, he led the Lakers to the championship and played center in the final game without Kareem. So that's what I know about basketball. But the two of them, you never understood how brilliant they were in basketball knowledge, and what incredible competitors they were in terms of being able, like I say, Dick made every broadcaster better. Those two guys turned the game around to the point that the team was bigger than an individual, and they were two great individuals that understood how to compete and to make the game what it was. But that game itself,
not a
although
great game.
I guess it's still the highest rated game ever in college basketball history, the game itself was not a great game.
No, it definitely wasn't. Did you sense right away, Billy, in the late 70s? I know you did that 78 championship game, and Al was annoyed that Givens was trying to break the scoring record there of a championship game as he went nuts late, and Duke lost by 6. I remember that game very well. That was his first year. Did you sense right away that you guys had something special working together?
Things grew with Al and myself over the years. We became very close friends. In my adult life, I would consider him my closest friend. But we never spent any time together throughout that entire first year. And it was really interesting. The Final Four was in St. Louis, and I went to Mass on Easter Sunday down in that little chapel underneath the arch. And I'll never forget this. I'm going to communion, and I look, and there were a number of homeless people sitting up in the front. And as I turned around, I noticed Al was sitting among them in old beat-up clothes.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what in the hell is he? I didn't even know he went to church half the time. So when I got out of Mass that day, he was waiting for me outside. And we had never had a personal conversation, even though we'd worked the entire year. And he said, let's go for a walk. And we did. And we were walking down on the river. And he said, are you hungry for lunch? And I said, yeah. And I don't think we had ever had a meal together. And so he hollered to the guys on the boats that were docked up, saying that he was a member of the food and drug people from the city of St. Louis. They need to get on the boat. So we go on the boat, and he wanted to take a look at the kitchen to see if it was in good shape. And we go down there, and he said, make us some lunch. And we had lunch, and I'm sitting there in amazement. You had these beat-up clothes on, and we get back out on the street, and he says, how was that for lunch? And I said, it was pretty good. And from that point on, we became kind of inseparable pals. He was an incredible person, and I'll tell a story that about Dick had, unfortunately, in his first marriage didn't work out too well, and he was writing a book about how men need to get their lives back together after a separation. So he wanted to talk to Dick and to Al and myself about marriages, and of course that's the last thing Al wanted to talk about. So we go up to Dick's house, and Dick's sitting there, and he's got his pencil in hand to get all the notes, and he looks at Al, and he said, Al, you've been married for a long time. He said, what's the secret? And Al looks at him, and he says, you keep her happy, then get the hell out of the way, and left the room, and never to come back. And that was, and Dick said, what was that all about? I said, that's who he is, Dick. So it was an incredible opportunity to be involved with those two people, totally different, but just beautiful people in their own way, and Dick was always the leader.
How about the oh my, Billy? Every great broadcaster needs a catchphrase. He found that one. Do you remember the first oh my that you heard in the broadcast booth?
It's really interesting. That's something that has caught on now, where people, try to figure out something to say. With Dick, it was just a natural thing. Dick was never about himself, and it became obviously of his calling card. But I can honestly say that Dick is not the kind of person that would ever sit down and write notes as to how he could be noticed or recognized. So it was a genuine thing, and obviously a great calling card that everybody remembers him by.
Did you watch Dick do the other sports, Billy, in the off year? Did you watch him do the football? Did you watch him do the tennis?
Yes,
You're a pretty good sports. You did. Go ahead.
It's kind of like the last fellow I broadcast, Jim Nance. I love to watch Jim now. Now, Jim has never done baseball, so I don't want to put him in a. But when you listen to Jim Nance do a golf tournament as an example, it's just you just say, now there's greatness, because he doesn't have to do anything, because it just flows, and that's how the great ones are, that are able to do that and just make you feel comfortable in any sport they're doing. Gowdy, in his own way, early on in the beginning of television, had that way in all the sports that he did, and of course Dick did, and Jim is one of those guys that's come along the same way. It's like Bob Costas in the Olympics. You just kind of feel like, hey, I'm sitting right next to him, and it just flows perfectly.
Were you surprised that Dick, after that long career at 77 years of age, took the Padres job as a TV announcer?
He loved baseball. As a matter of fact, and I people maybe on the West Coast would not agree with this, but Dick told me that he was doing a million different things on the West Coast. He'd been really a teacher, and he always was, in his heart, a teacher. And he was doing a million different kinds of jobs and trying to make a living and so forth. And he said that Gene Autry heard him and called him up and said, Dick, I want you to come and be a broadcaster for my baseball team. And Dick thought, what a terrific opportunity. And he and Autry, I understand, heard him doing not baseball, but something else on the radio. And that's how Dick got his first opportunity to do Major League Baseball. But, as I said again, of the three major sports, I don't think anybody ever combined the ability that he had to personalize those games in such an incredible way, both from a standpoint of his knowledge of the sport, his emotional feel for the players, the fans, the coaches, the history of the sport, and blend that all together, whether it was NFL football, college basketball, or Major League Baseball.
Billy, what a job. And I appreciate you coming on fast notice. Good to have you with us. We'll talk soon. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Take care, Billy Packer on Enberg. Ebersol on Enberg. We'll get off this now and do some other things and get to some sports. We wanted to give you a little feel. Again, he's my hero. He's your favorite little talk show host hero growing up as a kid. And always good to the channel. Always. Don't forget that. Always.